When you're new to adventure riding, figuring out your luggage options isn't just about the space, but it's also about how it affects your ride. Making the wrong choice can make off-road riding awkward, city riding a pain in the butt, and for fragile equipment like cameras, can rattle themselves into an early retirement. So what is the best luggage option? Tank bag is one of these items that is great in theory, but in reality, it can actually get in the way of you being a better rider. Super accessible for small items that you want to access quickly and often, things like cameras, wallet, and most importantly, sugar. And it's also accessible while you're still on the bike, so you can access these things without having to dismount. However, I recently ditched mine because I found that I was just not quite in the right position and it was right in the way. So now I can get right forward. It means I'm a little more comfortable with where I can put my knees, gives me a little more room to move. But it also means when things get really interesting is you can get forward, feel a lot more comfortable, but feel a lot more confident at the same time. The other downside is for most motorcycles, your fuel cap is right underneath this sucker, so you need to remove it every single time you want to fill up the tank, which is a bit of a pain when you're on long rides doing 300 or 400 kilometers in a day. Also, I'm a little bit security conscious, so these aren't lockable unless you get a really expensive one. And generally those lockable ones aren't suited for off-road. If you want to walk away from the bike and it's in a busy place, then those valuable items are a little vulnerable. Of course, you can remove it and take it with you. The other thing to be mindful of is as well, like where it's mounted can cause some scratches on the bike. So if you like a nice shiny Duco, like I do, then you might want to put something underneath it to stop it from scratching, but that's something to be mindful of as well. So super convenient for small stuff depending on the location of your fuel cap, but for off-road riding, maybe think about ditching it so that you can get nice and forward on the bike. Your confidence will reward you. Another option is the trusty backpack. Now, it's not very common in adventure riding, however, personally, I won't go very far without this. I'm using the Low Pro Flipside Trek BP 250, hell of a mouthful, but a great backpack. It's compartmentalized and it is set up for photography and it's great for carrying my SLR. However, it's also quite customizable, so you can really fit anything you want in it. Vibration on a motorcycle, particularly single cylinders, can destroy equipment such as mobile phones when they're mounted on the handlebars, which most people know about it, or have discovered at least once. But particularly things like cameras and so on. So taking them off the bike, it means that they're protected in here. So I carry my drone and my cameras in the backpack. Another slight thing is that the weight gets a bit of the weight off the bike and onto me. So, you know, your bike is roughly 2/3 of the total mass. So we're moving a little bit from that 2/3 and putting it on the 1/3. So it makes things a little bit easier for moving the bike around underneath you. Minor, but can contribute. The other thing too is it's always with you. So when you get off the bike, you don't have to grab it, you don't have to detach it. It's already attached to you. Also has a little more capacity than a tank bag, particularly if you're carrying something like a laptop or a tablet or an iPad if you're Apple inclined. So it does generate a little bit more heat, or doesn't allow the heat to get out of your jacket quite as easily. And of course it's sitting on your back. However, if you've got some sort of back protection, then that's going to separate a little bit, allow some airflow, so it's not too bad. Personally, I haven't found it that bad. I've never kind of gone, I wish I didn't have it. And of course, the other downside is that you've got to remove it to be able to access whatever you're needing. So if you need to grab the drone out, you've got to take it off. And of course, putting it somewhere, I tend to just hang it off the end of the handlebar. You know, accessing it is obviously harder than getting it from a tank bag. It's great for small things, particularly if you're doing little day rides and you just want to take, you know, a drone and a couple other bits and pieces with you, then it's a great size for that. But obviously you're not going to get very far with a tent in it. On the other end of the spectrum and the motorcycle, there are some more versatile options. However, there are some downsides. To be honest, I never thought I would own one of these, but it came with the bike and I've used it a couple of times, and I have to say I found it quite convenient for commuting and going into the city and so on. Haven't used it off-road, but there are some pros and cons for each of these. So super convenient for storing things like your jacket and your helmet, and obviously it's lockable. So if you're going anywhere where there's people around, it's a great way to store your stuff so you can walk around without having to carry everything. Added benefit if you're with a pillion passenger touring, then having a backrest is a really good thing for them. I actually found it quite convenient. I had my daughter Zoe on the back, and so non-experienced pillions will find that much easier and much more comfortable. Of course, it puts the weight in the worst possible place, high and rearward of the bike, which makes it really unstable off-road. Touring is completely tolerable, not usually much of a problem, but if you're new to going off-road and you've got a fair amount of weight up here, it may be the bike that's the problem and not you. It might be you, but it might not be. Also, the other downside is it's just a big wide open space, which means that things can float and move around. Again, for off-road, things are going to rattle around, so you need some sort of storage option in the back here to be able to keep everything secure. However, the number one reason I don't like this on, particularly in off-road, is when you get on the bike. Obviously I'm being dramatic there, but you end up doing these ones instead, which I always find a bit awkward and weird, particularly if you have a tank bag sitting here as well. It makes it pretty awkward. Now, you might try it out in the garage and go, yeah, I can tolerate that, but it's when the bike's sitting on an uneven ground and you're on a 20-degree angle, that's when things get interesting. So personally, I prefer to get rid of that and not have it, because it makes getting on and off the bike a hell of a lot easier. Not having something there, you can just swing over the top of it. If I really need that space, then I use a bag like this one, which is just a little bit flatter, sits a little bit lower, so it doesn't get right in the way like this one does. So, great for commuting and touring, not great for hill climbs. And last but not least is the pannier bags or boxes. Now this is where we have maximum capacity. So I've got these ADV Works bags. I've really impressed with these, been using them for quite some time now. They're really good. 20 litres on either side, so that's 40 litres in total. Plenty of space for me to put all my camping gear. So I can go moto camping off this. I've got my spares and storage in the front smaller bags. I think they're the 8-litre ones from memory. But if I really need it, then I've got a 15 litre I can put on the back here. But generally I can fit everything into these. And the big advantage of this is that while the weight is still rearward of the bike, it's down nice and low, which means, oh no, I'm going to say that word, center of gravity. It is a little more optimal than having it up here messing about with the geometry of the bike. Of course, the added advantage is that without anything on the back there, plenty of room to swing your leg over to get on and off the bike. Well, the pros of this is where we can store maximum capacity. The downside is this is where we can store maximum capacity. So the amount of space that you decide to put on your bike, you will fill it, and that will weigh the bike down. So I have purposefully gone for the 20-litre bags, even though there is a 30-litre option, because I want to keep that weight to a minimum. I want to force myself to keep that weight down. And personally, I found 20 litres to be perfect. This is where we can make things difficult for ourselves. You pack this full of stuff and really heavy things, and next thing you've forgotten how to ride. Now, of course, that is dependent on the type of riding you're doing. So if you're doing difficult stuff, tricky terrain and so on, it's gonna be a bit more of a problem than if you're just doing touring. Now, the other thing too is a lot of comments around soft bags versus hard bags. Advantage of hard bags is that they are lockable, so much more secure if you're going to be parking in busy places. However, the downside of hard bags, if you go off-road, they can actually be quite dangerous for injuring your leg, because you've got this soft one will absorb impact, and if you get your leg caught under here, it's not too much of a problem. But on a hard bag, that's going to cause some damage. I don't know how much of that is urban myth, because I've never met anyone who's actually had an issue with lockable bags. Having said that, this bike came with hard case lockable bags, but they're still in my roof for a reason. That also talks to my type of riding. You know, I'm doing mostly off-road stuff, so I don't have a need for the hard and lockable case. Great thing about these bags is they've got an inner liner, so you just lift them out and you can just leave the bag on the side. Of course, the downside of soft as well is this is where you're prone to damage when you drop the bike. So anything you've got in here is susceptible to being, lent on, and we've certainly found that out when we went to go and cook our dinner at a moto camp, and we had to straighten out the equipment before we could start cooking. But generally, I haven't had too many issues of breaking stuff in these bags. Trick is just don't drop it. So pannier bags, sort of the must-have really if you're doing overnight stuff, but don't overweigh it. Match the luggage to your ride. Whether you're commuting, you're touring, or going off-road, all require different setups. Don't just think about the bike itself, but think about your usability of these things. So what happens when you get off the bike? Where are you going to be parking? Is it somewhere where you need to secure your items? Or are you off-road camping and you don't need to worry about it? Weight matters, but it's not just about how much, but where it sits. That's really important. Start small. If you're just starting out, then a small tank bag, small backpack and so on will be good to get you going. Obviously, the further you go, the more you're going to need. So some pannier bags. At some point when you start doing multi-day rides, you're going to need pannier bags. So if that's the intention, go with them straight away. However, my advice would be to start with a smaller size and get to a point where you really need something bigger before you think about it. So if you're new to adventure riding, I hope that helps. Give us a like, subscribe, all that sort of nonsense. All right, see you out there.